Hello everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Dragalia Weekly. It's been an up and down week in Dragalia Lost, and there's a lot to talk about in today's video. If you haven't seen it already, I did do a summoning session for Gala, so I'll be sure to post a link to that in the description. And at that time, I discuss a lot of recent bugs facing the game, as well as just the issue of power creep with Gala in general. So I'm not going to double down on that much in this video. Our focus will be more on a splash of adventure, both the new raid as well as the new summon showcase, except I want to comment on my previous remarks just to say, despite some of my complaints or concerns with recent bugs, they are definitely an outlier and not the norm, and I feel like the way that the dev team has addressed these is in keeping with how good they are at communicating with and compensating the player base when issues like this arise. So we got 1200 free Wormite to celebrate the event since I made that summoning video, and we also got another tenfold as compensation for the display bug that was affecting the Wormprint shop. So this is in line with how we've been treated by the devs in the past. My bigger concern is definitely the power creep as compared to the bugs. I do worry that Gala is so far beyond the pale that she creates a situation of haves and have-nots. Maybe one day there will be a way for us to choose a Gala adventurer and add them to our roster so that people could choose her, similar to how Fire Emblem Heroes players often use Brave Lynn or Brave Veronica as a really strong, free-to-play, catch-all type of option and solution for a lot of challenges in that game. As things are though, she is exclusive, she is coveted, and I'm sorry to those of you who really went all out trying to summon her and weren't able to do so. It's something I want to gestate on and think about a little more before I come down on power creep. It's definitely one of those things where this seems to be an outlier, but together with some of the skill dragon changes that I will talk about in this week's video, I am concerned. So other than that, for housekeeping, I just want to mention it is a new month, so make sure you check out your Void Battle treasure trade and your Astral Raids treasure trade. Hopefully you saved some of your Astral Shards from the previous month, and you're able to go ahead and cash those in for augments, since Astral Raids won't run while normal raids are taking place. Anyway, though, let's go ahead and move into our summoning discussion for today while I show off my daily deals from the week. So this week I really didn't get a whole lot exciting from my daily deals, except a dragon I already mentioned in my Gala summoning, since I did the daily deals on the Gala before I posted that summoning video. So of course that dragon was Konohana Sakuya, and she, Shinobi, and Siren recently got this buff, which I still find to be a bit strange. These dragons, in particular Shinobi, were already extremely good. There were lots of candidates who valued skill damage sufficiently that those dragons could be the best dragons available to them. But after this buff, in vacuum type scenarios like the Mercurial Gauntlet for instance, these dragons are basically the best for almost any adventurer, barring ones who are more support types whose primary skills provide buffs like Elisan, or maybe provide a shield or something else of that nature. So there are very few instances where an adventurer would prefer Arctos or Dragon Yule Jean, and I don't think there are even any in the case of Shinobi where adventurers would prefer Marishiten, except for the one weakness of these dragons, which is, your basic attacks and force strikes are not going to be quite as good. So say Yaten in Shadow, even though his DPS is higher with Shinobi, his ODPS, or overdrive damage per second, is going to be lower, so that's one case where maybe you actually want to use Marishiten instead of Shinobi. I will say, in general, I'm not extremely concerned about the dragons because I do think another big weakness of these dragons is facility events. Anytime you're dealing with lots of small enemies, and in particular shielded ones, you have to be able to do decent damage with your basic attacks because your volley of skill skills is going to run out at some point. And having a lot of skill damage will just mean you're overkilling some of these enemies with your skills. You have a lot more skill damage than is necessary, but your basic attacks might be doing very little against a lot of those more bulky enemies that appear in the Master Difficulty Facility events. So that's kind of one area of balance where I think that these might not be the best in class dragons. However, for things like Mercurial Gauntlet, for the High Dragon Trials, they do seem to basically be the best within their respective elements. The other big summoning change that was kind of casually tucked into our details on the new banner was that the Focus Dragon now has a 0.8% base rate to be summoned compared to a 0.5% base rate before. So if any of you have ever been pity broken by off-focus dragons, I think you will appreciate this change. This should incentivize you to maybe pick up a copy of Siren, and the nice thing about this is having a higher focus rate for the dragon actually makes sense because dragons are something that you want multiple copies of to unbind. So my math on this showed that compared to before, this should reduce the median to pull the focus dragon by about 1/10-fold. So previously I found that 50% of my simulations were able to pull the focus dragon within 12 10-folds, and this brought it down to 11 10-folds. And I'll show a chart that I made that kind of displays this, and you can also see that under the new rate, you converge to that 100% slightly faster than you would have otherwise. So from the simulations I did, it doesn't seem like a huge change, but I did want to point it out, it's now easier to snipe these focus dragons very slightly than it is to snipe for focus adventurers. And so I do think this is a positive change in summoning. That's all I really want to talk about as far as summoning goes, because later in this video, as the main topic, I am going to address the entire Summon Showcase as a whole and sort of give you my review of that. So now let's move into current events in Dragalia Lost. We have our Splash of Adventure raid that started in the middle of this week, and as of yesterday or the day before, depending on when you're watching this, we also have Nightmare Mode now unlocked. I think this fight has really cool mechanics, like the hot potato bombs that you can hit to toss around. There are some barrels that can capture you, even when you're in dragon form, and launch you up in the air. And overall, I have to say it's probably one of my favorite raids. My only disappointment is that our new summer music is only on the menu screen and not in the battle itself. So I would love if they would change that, but I can't really see it happening with this little time left in the event. Maybe they'll do it for part 2 of the event, which is still a mystery. So as far as the story goes, I was really pleased with Erasmus. I thought he was a really cool dragon. It's a little bit unfortunate that the welfare dragon himself, as a gameplay dragon, isn't that great. The other thing that kind of surprised me was Siren was barely involved. She showed up in the later half of the event and had a role to play in getting Barbary through using the Otherworld fragments, but basically that was it. So I think that Siren will play a role in part 2 of the event. That's kind of what's been teased. And looking at the character artwork, it seems to me that Verica and Luca will have a bigger role to play as well. I don't think they would just bring along Verica on this quest for no reason, so I do think there's going to be a second summer banner, and I would predict that Verica and Luca will both be a part of it. They'll both be summonable on it. Since their artwork just looks a little more detailed than that of Elisand's and even Yuden's, for instance, so I do think they will be around, and if I had to make a prediction, I would say that maybe we also get a Karina alt. Karina is on focus on the current banner as a 4-star. It seems like she might have a connection to Barbary. I'll link to a really cool Reddit post that kind of theorized about how Karina got her hat. That got me thinking along these lines. The other possibility, I think, is that maybe we would get a Nina alt. Nina is the merchant in the shop of Dragalia Lost, and she also has a really cute summer outfit right now. But I have to say, her summer outfit looks more like a generic outfit similar to what's on Elisand. So if I had to draw a line in the sand, I would say they will probably not be summonable, but Verica and Luca, to me, they definitely look like they are. We'll wait and see, maybe next week or maybe the week after, if they do end up being involved in a second part of the event. So my first few nightmare clears have been playing as we discussed the event. You can see that I didn't have too much trouble clearing this in pubs, but I will say that when I tried to clear this on Discord and help people out who were at a little bit lower might level, it was surprisingly hard. So I don't know if I just got lucky and just slotted into really good pubs for my first couple of clears. I got careless, and on my first clear my Elisan did die, so that's why I went in for a second clear where I got my Deathless. I'm not having any issues doing this every day, it seems to be fine, and I had already been investing heavily into my water team for Mercurial Gauntlet, where I also was able to clear 50 this week, which I'm pretty happy with. But yeah, that's pretty much my experience with the raid. The usual tips apply. Do the boss battle for bronze. You can do standard for silver, expert for golds. Occasionally you'll get EX from experts, which you should always do since it's free. You can do nightmare once a day. And that's pretty much it for the raid. I'm not planning on rushing it too much. I'm going to enjoy it at a leisurely pace while I also try play some high dragons and play some Mercurial Gauntlet where I'm still working on wind. But that's going to do it for current events this week. So now let's move into our interlude where I want to talk about the new alliances feature. So first of all, I know a lot of people are going to ask about this in the comments, so hopefully you watched to this point in this video and you won't leave a comment about this, but if you're wondering, I do have an alliance and it's already full. I decided to try recruit from people who are active on our Discord server, since I still find that to be the most effective way to communicate with other players and to team up for co-op. The alliance feature to me so far seems to do no harm, but I also find that it's not very helpful. I think it's very hard to communicate once you form a lobby since there's no chat system within the lobby, so you can't go back to your alliance chat and ask people, hey, are you actually joining? Should I wait here? And another thing is you can't easily browse other alliances if you've already formed one. So I can only view my own alliance. I have no idea what other alliances exist out there. Another feature that I would like to see changed is you can't easily add other alliance members to your friends list. So there's lots of small issues like that, but like I said, I don't think alliances are really hurting anything right now. I think that there's room for them to improve them, but I am still concerned about eventual PvP. And one of my speculations was that this summer event would somehow involve alliances, and maybe that's how part 2 will work in the end. There's other little nagging things with alliances where, like, for instance, you'll get notifications to play with others, but by the time you go check on the room, it's not there, or you're not able to join it easily, or it's an EX room and not everybody has an EX just lying around, or maybe you don't have wings at the time. So I just feel like there's lots of small issues where communication, if it were just faster to type messages into the alliance and ask other players or ping other players specifically and say, hey, you posted about this a few hours ago that you need help. Are you still here? Do you need help? You know, when are we going to do this? I think that would be a big bonus to the alliance system. And I think right now, this is best suited to people who actually know each other in real life. Like a small group of friends who has another means of primary chat with one another, and they just use the alliance button when they actually just want to make a private room that's for their alliance members specifically. The rewards for logging in daily are decent, but nothing super special or exclusive, which I actually like, since it means if you don't care about the alliance feature, you can just make an alliance of one, collect your rewards, and be along your day. There's also a nice login bonus going on right now, and there's a 300 Wormite incentive that ends sometime in August just for playing an alliance battle, and to do that you just have to start a battle with the alliance setting on. So you can even form a public lobby. Once it fills up, switch over to alliance as your room type, play the game, and that should be enough for you to get your endeavor and eventually get your 300 Wormite rather. So that's pretty much all I want to say about alliances. I know it's definitely a negative take, but I am sending all this feedback to Psy Games. I'm going to make sure to make use of that feature, so if you have some feedback about alliances or other things in the game, since there were some other issues earlier in the week, then I definitely encourage you to use that support feature, send feedback in, because the company has a good track record of being responsive to it. So that's going to do it for our interlude for this week. Now we come to the topic of the show, which is my banner review. So first of all, I want to say that Karina and Vojanoi are both on this banner, but since they're not brand new, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about them in this video. I have done a spotlight on Karina in the past. That was before Void Agni came out, so one wrinkle to that is she ended up not being very good for Void Agni because there's no Scorch Resistance or Scorching Air Res axe that she can use for that. So that is a bit of a disappointment compared to what I thought about her then, but she is still a fantastic unit, great for this event, great DPS, and Vojanoi is a really good water strength dragon that can round out your team. It's in that budget dragon category where the ceiling is 45% strength, but still a solid dragon, and both are positive additions to the showcase. I also want to briefly touch on the new worm prints that came out. Although they're not part of the banner itself, Beach Battle is the first one, and this provides water skill haste and buff time, so your natural inclination for a print like this is to think that this would be really good for Elisanne, and it is good on Elisanne, but you have to also think about what her sweet spots are for skill haste. And in Elisanne's case, she can charge her first skill with 2 full combos plus 4 strikes at the end. At 9% skill haste, she can cut off one of the 4 strikes, and at 23% skill haste, she can cut off both of those 4 strikes. So those are a couple of her sweet spots, and Beach Battle only given 7% means that it alone isn't going to get you there. Now, say you have a base co-ability archer on your team that gives 8% skill haste if they're a 5-star, and maybe you also equip Jewels of the Sun to your Elisanne, plus this new worm print, well, now you're getting 15% through your prints, plus 8% through your archer, and you're at 23%. So there is some merit to this worm print. If you haven't already invested into another buff time print, it's not like it's worse than any other print. And I'd also add that I'm not 100% sure how the AI behaves with Elisanne, but it's possible that this skill haste, due to the bizarre combos of the AI, might actually be good on the AI. That's something I would need to verify myself and test a lot to actually find out, but all I can say is that this shouldn't be worse for you than Halidom Grooms or Bella Thorna especially. Halidom Grooms technically has energy double buff as a second ability, but that ability is extremely weak, especially on a character like Elisanne, who isn't really focused on skill damage. So you may also be wondering about using this print on other adventurers besides Elisanne, but I can't really see any other water adventurers who it's worth using buff time on at the expense of another very valuable or very good worm print. So for that reason, I think this is best used on Elisanne. Not needed because by itself, it's not going to do a whole lot for you. But if you're pairing this with Jewels of the Sun, you are going to be above that 9% amount. And if you have an archer on top of that, you can get to that 23% amount as well. So it still does have some pretty decent uses. Summer Paladins, on the other hand, it's really hard to find a good candidate for. I mentioned how energy double buff wasn't very good on Halidom Grooms, and it's just as bad on Summer Paladins because 1 energy every time you receive a defense buff is just really weak. You have to be receiving a ton of defense buffs to make this matter, and the problem with Summer Paladins is that Kung Fu Masters and the critical rate that provides is so good on axes that Kung Fu Masters plus Flower in the Fray or Evening of Luxury is just an extremely good and hard to beat combination. Summer Paladins seems like its best candidates might be Ramona and maybe Julieta, the original one, since they have some defense buffs built into their kits, but in Ramona's case, it's on her second skill and it's very costly to use. Ramona could be used in a team comp with Reyna so that prime defense would kick in, but even in that team comp, that prime defense only works once every 15 seconds, so in a 2-minute match like the Mercurial Gauntlet, you're getting at most 8 stacks of energy from this energy double buff. And if Ramona is able to use her second skill a couple times, well, you're getting maybe 10 stacks of energy, which is 2 energized skills. It's not that good compared to how much critical rate you can get off of Kung Fu Masters, in my opinion. Especially since Kung Fu Masters, it's easy to cap that skill damage with the second print. And on Julieta, unless you have a lot of Ryozan on the team or something and it's kind of a meme team, I see it as being similarly weak. So that's kind of what I think about the Wyrmprince and the returning 4 stars on this banner. Now let's talk about the new dragon and the 3 new adventurers. So first up is Siren. I said about Siren earlier that she is a fantastic dragon, and she has surpassed Dragalia Lost and Leviathan for a lot of types of content, in particular sandbag modes where your basic attacks don't have to knock down or defeat mobs quickly, so high dragon trials. However, Leviathan still has a really awesome dragon form, and Dragalia Lost still has a really good aura on your more support type adventurers or some adventurers like Laranoa who really value critical rate. So there's still uses for these other 2 water dragons, and if you've heavily invested in them and aren't struggling with Flame 50 of the Mercurial Gauntlet, I don't know that you really want or need a Siren right now. It might be good to pick one up, but there's not a pressing need to, say, max unbind a Siren, since the level of power in water was already more than sufficient to be able to take down that particular gauntlet. For reference, the Flame Gauntlet, where you use water characters, at 50 has less HP than the Wind Gauntlet, which is where you use flame characters, at level 41. So it was already an easier fight, but if you do happen to pick up some Siren, for characters with multiple attacking skills, she is fantastic. Even at a base copy, she is going to be close, if not better, than your Vogenoise for many characters. So Siren is a fantastic dragon. Her skill isn't as good as Shinobi's. Shinobi's an outlier among these dragons in that he has a great dragon form, he has a great skill, and he has this great aura of strength and skill damage. One other thing to say about Siren is that she does mean your strength Wyrmprince, like your Evening of Luxury, like your Crystallian Envoys and Bonds Between Worlds, start to look better than on the dragons who provide strength, or a lot of strength, like Leviathan. Since she provided so little strength on her own, you're suffering less from diminishing returns from that extra strength you're getting off your Wyrmprince. So that's pretty much what I want to say on Siren. Fantastic dragon, but water is pretty stacked. So if you really need something for your water team, she's a good pickup. If you don't, I wouldn't exactly stress about getting Siren right now. Compared to Shinobi and Konohana Sakuya, I feel like Siren faces much tougher competition from Leviathan and even, to some extent, from Dragalia Lost. So right now, for instance, there are people, if you're doing Theorem speed clears, who would probably prefer that you bring Leviathan, since Leviathan has such a good dragon form that in a short match, he is going to be better than Siren. Another situation where these skill damage dragons would be weaker is a little more niche, but there are things like skill resistance in void battles. So for example, Siren wouldn't be a great dragon on a melee character for Void Agni, and then to a lesser extent, Curse is also a factor that affects skill damage, but obviously with a dragon like Siren, you're probably not taking her or taking your water adventurers to much curse-inducing content. Now let's take a look at the adventurers. Our only male character on this showcase is the 4-star Summer Celery. His first skill is Surf's Up, and it deals 4 hits of water damage directly ahead and can inflict Bog. You can also sort of change direction during this attack. Pretty straightforward skill, good amount of damage, but Ronzel himself, as a water blade, he's one of the weaker ones. He has the defense typing, so his strength stat isn't all that great to begin with, but it is still nice to see another water blade in general, since we only have Celiera and Gerota so far. His second skill is Barbecue Bonanza. This one increases his and nearby allies' strength by 10% for 15 seconds, and then also grants an HP regen effect. One thing to note about how AI use this skill is that they hold it until they actually need to heal someone. So that's kind of a downside to both this skill and Odetta's skill. They're a heal combined with a strength buff, and the AI won't cast these on cooldown, they'll save them to actually heal someone. So he's not quite as good as an AI for that reason. Ronzel's abilities are Last Offense, which is okay. You can kind of plan around this, and he doesn't have anything else in his kit inherently that's HP dependent, so it's not as bad an idea to consider taking him to a low HP in order to trigger this. Then Ronzel has Stun Res, which is good for Void Agni, good for Flame IO, but not good for Brunhilde's Trial. It is good for the current raid. And finally, if you decide to promote Summer Ronzel, he gets access to Prime Defense. I definitely underestimated these primed abilities back when they were first released on Ramona's banner, and I think that they're pretty powerful just because they're a way that your AI characters can contribute to your main character's stats and damage in some cases. However, defense is one of the weaker ones, since it doesn't contribute to your DPS. Basically, you would need something like Strength Double Buff to really take advantage of this, and that requires either a character passive or using up a Wormprint slot in order to gain access to that. And I would add that I already mentioned how Barbecue Bonanza isn't very good if Ronzel is the AI, so you'd probably want to control him, in which case he's going to be the one receiving a defense buff, and he's already got a lot going on with his kit with an attacking skill, Last Offense, Barbecue Bonanza, which is a heal plus a strength buff, to the point that it's going to be a little bit competitive or costly to slot in some double buffs onto him. I'm not saying it's impossible. You could probably run something like Resounding Rendition plus First Rate Hospitality. You could probably also go with Valiant Crown alongside another Wormprint, but there's a little bit of an expense to do that. And from what I can tell, Ronzel's DPS overall isn't that great. I do think he's kind of nice in terms of survival with Barbecue Bonanza, with that Prime Defense possibly coming into play, or even Last Offense if you're anticipating taking a lot of damage in a quest. So I could see Summer Ronzel being good for Astral Raids in the future if we get a Barbary rerun, and not being too bad against the Barbary Nightmare difficulty, since he can help with your team strength through his co-ability. He has the right resistance, plus since that buff applies to nearby allies, it should also apply to characters on other players' teams. That's all I really have to say on Summer Ronzel. Really good artwork, by the way, so I want to give a shout out to that. I love how he has those skewers of meat next to him, and he is looking really good in his summer alt. From there, we come to our first of the two 5-stars, Summer Celery. I know Celery was a huge fan favorite during the very first raid of the game, so it's really cool to see a welfare unit finally get an alt. And Celery's skills, Ocean Fury and Pep Talk, are both attacking skills, which is already a point in her favor. She's a support unit, so her stats aren't as heavily skewed towards strength as attack types like Xander, for instance, but she still has a decent stat spread, and like Xander, she's a water sword. So Ocean Fury is the name of her first skill. This might get renamed because right now it's the exact same name as Summer Estelle's skill, so this could be a localization error. But Ocean Fury, like Ronzel's first skill, inflicts Bog and deals water damage ahead. I didn't talk much about the Bog when it came to Ronzel, and that's mostly because for a lot of harder content, enemies are immune to Bog. The example that comes to mind right away with water characters is Brunhilde's Trial. Pretty much every high dragon, actually every high dragon, is immune to Bog. They can't be bogged at all. You can use Bog in the Mercurial Gauntlet, but for harder levels of the Gauntlet, it will only be able to trigger once in a match. So having random instances of Bog is actually kind of a detriment to these two characters, since usually you want to trigger Bog at a very specific time, and that's during your primary break. Sometimes you'll only get one break in a quest, but if not, what I mean by this is basically a break where you've lined up Bog, you have some skills ready to use afterward, you have maybe a strength buff or two on your characters. So ideally you want to stack all of that at the same time, since Bog, the main benefit to it, isn't so much that it slows down enemy movement, it's that it increases your damage to the enemy greatly. So this is kind of a drawback on this skill, but if you're not running Leviathan and say you're using Siren, well, it's good to at least have a source of Bog in a character's kit. Then Celery has Pep Talk as her second skill. This one also deals water damage, like I said, and it has the skill shift mechanic. So every time you use this, you'll be able to increase the entire team's defense by 10% for 10 seconds. Okay, but you really need some kind of strength double buff to play off of that if you want to truly exploit it. Phase 2, you're getting a 10% increase to team strength for 10 seconds. And Phase 3, you're getting an additional 20% increase to the team's attack rate for 10 seconds. So those second and third phases are definitely a lot better. And once you're on phase 3, you can intentionally miss with the skill if you want to remain on phase 3 and continuously be able to provide that buff. So it's very similar to Marth's, but unfortunately Marth has strength in every phase of his skill. Pep Talk has defense, which actually could be okay if you're using, like I said, some type of strength double buff mechanics or builds. And even though these say 10 seconds, well, Summer Celery's third ability is buff time of 30%. Buff time is a good ability on a character like this, but it's even better on characters whose primary skill is a buff. In this case, it's just an added benefit of 3 seconds each time you use Pep Talk, which isn't bad, but probably not worth dedicating additional Wormprint slots toward. Celery also has strength double buff, so she already works off of her own Pep Talk really well. One thing to note is that buff time only applies to buff skills, not abilities, so it's not affecting the duration of strength double buff. That is always going to be 15 seconds. And finally, Celery has burn res that goes up to 100%. So, unlike Summer Ronzel, she is really well suited to face off against Hybernhilda, and she stands out very favorably compared to Xander, who is our other 5-star water sword, in that regard. Right now, any character can reach 100% burn res because we have a couple prints that provide 50% each, but when you have 100% burn res in that character's innate kit, it really opens up the power of the builds that you can bring to Hybernhilda's trial, since you can use your Wormprints for more DPS, more survival through things like the Volcanic Queen Wormprint, and it gives you a lot more flexibility in the build ideas that you can put forward. So I think for that reason, Summer Celery is a really good standout for that fight. The 5-star water sword is fantastic. It adds a third attacking skill, so skill damage is great on Summer Celery. She's one of those adventurers, because she's a sword, that you could argue over Leviathan versus Siren. With 3 attacking skills, Siren is going to be really good on her, and you could also make the case Leviathan's going to be pretty good because you want to have a high base strength, not to mention the fact that she also wants to be force striking as a sword, and I would actually say that probably Leviathan or Dragalia Lost are going to be, for all practical purposes, her best dragon. Siren in a vacuum context like the Mercurial Gauntlet would likely be better, but in that context, unless you have 4 Mub Sirens, you have to pick and choose which adventurers get what, and this is definitely one of the adventurers that I would put a Strength Dragon on if you don't have enough Siren to go around. That's pretty much all I want to say on Summer Celery. She's a really powerful adventurer. I'm glad that she's gotten such a nice alt, and I feel like it's befitting of her character that this alt is really good at coaching people on the beach with that pep talk skill. Finally, though, we come to Summer Julieta, who is another 5-star, but I want to say she's sort of like the headliner of this banner, and she certainly has the power to back that up. So Summer Julieta is an attack type adventurer. She does have a very high strength stat, close to the highest stat in the game, which is 521 right now, decent max HP, and her skills are quite powerful as well. So her first skill is Sunny Flash. Really nice skill damage modifier on this, and like the other 2 adventures we just looked at, it can also inflict Bog, which is a really good effect. All the caveats apply that I just mentioned. Ideally, you wouldn't want to be throwing this out at random times, but from what I can tell, in particular Summer Celery and Summer Julieta are just strong enough that even if they mess with your Bog timing in something like the Mercurial Gauntlet, they're probably still going to be fine on your team, and depending on who else you have on your team, I don't think you'll have any trouble clearing. So I wouldn't stress about that fact too much. I don't think it's something where you want to avoid casting these skills on cooldown in order to try save Bog. Since Roy has some innate Bog res, there's also chances that you end up missing some of your first instances where you could have triggered Bog, and you end up getting a later Bog closer to break anyway. Sunny Flash is a great skill, long story short. Her second skill is Vacation Vigor. This one increases her and nearby allies' strength by 15% for 15 seconds, which is really good. We're talking about something similar to Summer Estelle's buff here in terms of the SP cost, but Julieta's only affects nearby allies, which is the limitation. However, it does have that skill shift component. So in phase 2, you're also getting an additional 10% increase to critical rate for 15 seconds. And in phase 3, the user and nearby allies get a 1U shield that nullifies damage less than 30% of the user, so Julietta's max HP. Of course, it doesn't stack with other shields. So Vacation Vigor, you need to be in proximity to the people that you're using it on or the allies you're using it on, but if you are, it's a very strong buff. In terms of abilities, Summer Julietta has Bog equals Team Strength, so every time she bogs an enemy, she'll buff the entire team strength by 10% for 10 seconds. It's an okay buff, similar to what we saw on Wedding Aoi and on Norwyn with Blind and Sleep. She has Stun Res that goes up to 100%, and then finally she has Primed Strength, which is very similar to what we just saw on Ramona last showcase. So the primed abilities are great. Bog equals Team Strength is okay. My knock against it is simply that Bog isn't something that most enemies are susceptible to begin with, let alone susceptible to multiple times. So it's not quite as good as something like Blind equals Team Strength, since High Jupiter actually is vulnerable to that. Stun Res is also good, but unfortunately for Void Agni in particular, there's no desirable water axe that has Scorching Air Res that Summer Julietta can use and really fight comfortably against Void Agni with. So she's not ideal for that scenario, even though she is really good against Barbary, and she'll probably be pretty good in the Mercurial Gauntlet as well. Because of that stun res, she's also not especially well suited to High Brunhilde's Trial, but being an axe and having that defense co-ability, at the least, Summer Julietta should feel very comfortable running without a High Brunhilde defense Wormprint. So she can easily drop the Volcanic Queen Wormprint in order to go for a 100% burn res build, and it would be no problem for her. Her Bog mechanics are not going to do anything against High Brunhilde, so she's still not amazing for that fight, and I would certainly say Rex is a lot better and easier to get 100% burn res on while maintaining good Wormprint setups. So that's kind of the unfortunate part about Summer Julietta, in my opinion, is just that there's no really hard content where she shines at this moment. And that's pretty much all I have to say on the new units on the banner. This is one of the better banners we've seen in a while. The returning 4 stars I already talked about earlier, Karina and Vojinoi, are both solid. Siren is a great dragon who's slightly easier to target now because of the changes to summoning rates for dragons at 5-star. Besides that, Summer Celery is a great candidate for High Brunhilde's Trial, so she has an application in the endgame. Summer Ronzel is probably the weakest adventurer here, but at the very least you could put him to use in this raid, and there's a lot of great fan service to be had with Summer Ronzel. And finally, Summer Julietta is very strong, but does lack a niche right now. Anyway, though, that's going to do it for the major topic of the show and for this week's Dragalia Weekly. I hope that you enjoyed my analysis of the banner, our look at a splash of adventure gameplay, and specifically Nightmare. I hope that you are having fun with the Alliances feature and are also sending in feedback for things you'd like to see improved. And I hope that you weathered through the issues that we had toward the beginning of this week, got all that compensation, and were able to put it to good use and get a lot of enjoyment out of it. That's going to do it for this week's video, everyone. Let me know how your week was in Dragalia Lost. What are your thoughts on the power creep situation that we're facing? What are your thoughts on some of these bugs that we've had? Are you concerned at all about power creep? That is still a pressing question for me, but I want to wait a few more weeks and see where we're at. Otherwise, everyone, thank you once again for watching. Have yourself a great week. Take care, and I'll see you next time.